College of Music and the Massachusetts Historical Society. And his research has taken him to libraries and archives throughout the US and the UK, and most recently to Paris.
So we'll suffer through this a little bit. I want to thank Diane for the invitation here today and for the opportunity to speak with you about one of the great unheralded events here in Massachusetts during the American Revolution. I'm going to give you a little bit of background about what I do as Executive Director of Revolution 250. So Revolution 250 is a consortium of more than 70 organizations working across Massachusetts to help communities and organizations plan and commemorate the events of 250 years ago when our forebears were here fighting for American rights, liberties, and independence. And we're going to tell all the great stories. You know, we're obviously Lexington, Concord, Bunker Hill. This December, the Boston Tea Party. It's all going to happen. But we also want to remind people that, as John Adams said, the real revolution was what took place in the hearts and minds of the people, long before a drop of blood was spilled at Lexington and Concord. Just don't tell the people of Lexington and Concord that, please. Never hear the end of it. Anyway, so we've been working with communities from Provincetown to Pittsfield, from Newburyport down here in New Bedford, to find those stories that speak to their communities and to their role in the American Revolution. And you know, one of the things that I have said since I took this job back in 2017 was that you know, for the people of Philadelphia, and really for much of our, let's say, political electorate, when you say 250 years of America, what do you suppose they think about?
July 4th, 1776.
That's right. Like, we were not something one day and we became something the next day, and everything that happened on either side of that date doesn't really matter. So America 250, which is the national semi-quincentennial, that is the word, semi-quincentennial, is working on the premise that all people are going to want to celebrate is July 4, 2026. They don't want to do, I mean, if they talk about anything that happens before that, it's just to build interest towards what happens in Philadelphia, July 4th, 1776. And then they don't want to talk about anything after that, which, as you can imagine, our friends in the Carolinas and Virginia, it just makes them so very happy because, of course, most of their story occurs long after that. Here in Massachusetts, a lot of our events are front-loaded, except for this one, for instance. So I'm going to see if I can boot this machine back up. Anyway, so as an example, I don't know what's asking me all kinds of questions. I just want to look at the presentation. So as an example, in March of 1776, the General Court of Massachusetts asked every town across the Commonwealth to vote on the idea of independence, and whether or not you and your neighbors would support independence if the Continental Congress decided to vote on it. And so about 220 towns in 1776. We have answers from about 150 of them, and 148 of them absolutely supported independence. Two, maybe not really sure. Dartmouth, 100% in favor of independence. So this is largely what Revolution 250 is working on, and we're working with partners all, not just across Massachusetts, but really all across New England, on telling the story of New Englanders during the American Revolution. And here, today, we're talking about the burning of New Bedford. So nothing happens in a vacuum, of course, so just a little bit of review of what has gone on before General Gray and his troops arrived in New Bedford. So, of course, victory at Saratoga, woohoo, yeah, big day, we captured Burgoyne and his army, we bring them all back here to Massachusetts, and U.S., the nascent, soon-to-be liberated United States signs a treaty with France, and then in April of 1778, France actually puts together its first military force, which is a fleet of 16 ships, almost 10,000 sailors, and 1,000 soldiers under the Comte d'Estaing, who are going to come to help George Washington and his army in whatever way Washington thought would be most useful. The French arrive off the Delaware River in July, and they have a little confab with Washington, and Washington suggests that he goes to Newport to help the American troops under General Sullivan liberate Newport. Newport, of course, had been in British hands since 1776, and it was a nice deep water harbor on Long Island Sound to help preserve British transports and shipping from raids by privateering. Privateering is a big industry in Massachusetts. So we would not have won the war without privateers. They capture all kinds of great supplies, gunpowder, which of course we don't make a lot of at the time, and weapons, uniforms, foodstuffs, anything and everything. And a lot of those ships are being sent into ports. The North Shore, in particular, does a lot of privateering. Newburyport, up along the Merrimack River, we've got Gloucester and Rockport and Salem, and all those communities largely built on the profits and spoils of privateering. Then we've got other communities, even Plymouth, with its very shallow harbor, is sending out privateers all along the Cape, and of course here in New Bedford. And I'm sure most of you know the history of New Bedford, and I don't want to be pedantic in any way, but it's not the great whaling port of the 19th century. I think we can all recognize that, at least at this point. There are whaling ships leaving from New Bedford. There is whale oil being brought into New Bedford at this time. And of course, its greatest claim to fame, as far as this year is concerned, is of course it's the place where the Dartmouth was built, which brought not just the tea from London, but also the first books of poetry written by Phillis Wheatley, an enslaved African living in Boston. And so the Dartmouth is built here, so it's a burgeoning port, and the Roach family has a lot to do with that. They're building warehouses, they're building rope walks, all the maritime trades are being carried on here in Bedford Harbor. Similarly, smaller ships are being built anywhere they can. They're building ships all along the coast of Cape Cod, obviously Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, and even at Aiken's shipyard over in Padenarum. And they are, it's a hive of activity, and the war takes its turn, takes its toll. The British occupy Newport, and the Americans are desperate to drive them out. So a call goes out. Washington's going to send up the French fleet. General Sullivan is asked to put together a force, but it's not just in. This is actually, I think the Battle of Rhode Island is one of the great untold stories of the Revolution as well. Of course, it happens in 1778, right before the burning of New Bedford. It's key to this story. And Sullivan assembles a force of more than 5,000 soldiers. Some of them are continental. You have a lot of great names of the great and the good here. You've got John Lawrence from South Carolina is up here. You've got the Marquis de Lafayette is up here. You've got a lot of Boston militia coming down. So soon to be Governor Hancock is bringing the Corps of Cadets down. You've got Paul Revere coming down with Thomas Craft's artillery. So a lot of a lot of names that have come down to us through our American history that we know and recognize are taking part in the Battle of Rhode Island, along with a lot of names we don't know. People that are, some of us may be descended from, who, lived and worked in the south coast of Massachusetts, the South Shore, and those are the militiamen going over to Providence, and some of them go to Providence, some of them go to Tiverton, but they're surrounding that whole northern end of Aquidneck Island. So in July, Sullivan is beginning to raise these troops, gathering them. You've got 5,000 people. I mean, are there 5,000 people in Tiverton today? I'm not sure, but he's got 5,000 troops hanging around in Tiverton. And the French arrive in early August, and this is seen as the group. We're gonna do it. We're gonna drive the British out of Newport. Tired of having them hanging around. And so, Sullivan, of course, it's an island, Aquidneck Island, so you got to move all the troops across. And in the process of this build-up, Sullivan had started collecting boats and animals and all kinds of things, and the British decide to do a preemptive strike. So they take a couple hundred guys, they load them onto boats and ships, they go up to Bristol, and they go up to Warren, they go up to Freetown, which is now Fall River, and they destroy any boats, any stocks of wood, anything that could be used in an offensive way during the assault on Aquidneck Island. And they're pretty successful, but the raids are small. The British have been raiding the coast for a long time by 1778. Taking thousands of animals for livestock and things like that. But the raids have always been pretty small. The largest raid up to this point was about 1,500 soldiers that raided Danbury, Connecticut, and largely destroyed the military depot that was there of supplies. They had never really gone any larger than that. So the French arrive in Newport on August 8th. Next day, Admiral Howe arrives with a British fleet. And the French say, well, we can't get stuck in Narragansett Bay. It's pretty narrow up there, so we're going to leave. We're going to take our soldiers that we just landed, and we're going to leave. And General Sullivan is saying, wait, what? You're leaving? That's crazy. But D'Estaing sails off after Lord Howe. Howe and D'Estaing get caught up in the storm, and a lot of the ships get damaged. And so Howe comes back into Long Island Sound. He's got to find a place to refit and restore his ships. D'Estaing goes to Boston. Anyway, I'm going to go to Boston. I'm going to get my ships repaired. Never mind. Anyway, so Sullivan now has 5,000 soldiers on an island trapped with a British army that is bigger than his, and there's now this new fleet of British warships in Narragansett Bay. But, he's going to give it the old, well, he's from New Hampshire, so he's going to give it the old Dartmouth College try. And so they go down into Newport. They besiege Newport for a few days. But when Howe's fleet comes in, Sullivan says this is untenable. And so he marches his soldiers back to the north end. And that's where the British actually do their major assault. As the Americans are fleeing up to the northern end of the island, the British troops march out. They've got the German soldiers on the left side, on the west side of the island. They've got the regular British forces under Lieutenant Colonel Francis Smith of Lexington and Concord fame. He's on the right side of the island, and they're driving the Americans back. They assault the Americans up at the north end of Aquidneck Island, and with acceptable losses, if anything is such, Sullivan's able to get his soldiers off the island. But then they stay there. He's got 5,000 guys just hanging around. They're camped in Providence, they're camped in Bristol and Warren, they're camped in Tiverton, and they're just sitting there. In the meantime, while all that is going on, General Clinton down in New York decides, you know what, those poor folks up in up in Newport, they're going to need some help. We're going to put together a force, we're going to go help them out. So he gets his most able commander, Charles Grey, the first Earl Grey. Not to be confused with the second Earl Grey, who's responsible for the tea. But the first Earl Grey, he's actually, his nickname is No Flints. No Flints Grey. And he got the nickname because of the Battle of Paoli, in which he led a surprise attack on an American encampment at night. And to make sure that his soldiers wouldn't accidentally fire their muskets and let the enemy know they were coming, he had all of his men remove the flints from their muskets. Bayonets only. And in they went. And it was a bloody little affair. Today, a lot of people know it as the Paoli Massacre. But this Grey gets his nickname as No Flints. And he gets his troops together. It's about 4,000 of them. And they're going to go reinforce Newport. And he's sailing up the Sound, and who should he run into but Lord Howe. Lord Howe coming back and saying, nope, Battle of Newport's all over. No need to worry about it. And Howe says, well, look, he says, I've got a battalion of light infantry, a battalion of grenadiers, and then I've got 2, 4, 6, 8 regiments of foot, some artillery, and a corps of pioneers. We got to give them something to do. I mean, we've been on the ship now for a couple of days. We want to give them something to do. And so Howe says, well, why don't you go... That's awesome. Why don't you go attack New London? There was a nest of privateers in New London, and he said, they're really driving me crazy. We know that there's a small fortification there. Just take them and go attack New London. So they sail down to New London. They get there late in the day. This is September 1st. And as they're sailing, one of the smaller ships is closer to shore, and they can hear muskets going off, alarm bells ringing, maybe an artillery piece being shot off, and he says, I think they know we're here. And No Flint says, yeah, maybe we won't attack, because if they're rallying the countryside, we could be in real trouble. He says, let's not attack here. Let's go someplace else. And so they sail further up the bay. And of course, one of the places they had on their list, and we can talk about how they got this intelligence, because that's an important part of the story, they decide to attack Bedford Harbor. And Bedford Harbor, again, because of its privateering history, had long been a thorn in the side of the British authorities. They know that in Bedford Harbor, on that moment, there's more than 70 ships in Bedford Harbor. And most of them are captured merchantmen, captured vessels, not all captured by the Americans. There were some very large ships that had recently been captured by the French fleet and sailed into Bedford Harbor. And so they decide that that's where they're going to attack. And where are they getting this information from? Well, they have 2 men who are working with them that we know about in particular. One is Eldad Tupper, which is just a great name. I'm sure many of you may be looking at your children and grandchildren saying, I should have used the name Eldad. But Tupper was a local loyalist and had a few run-ins early on with members of the Aikens family who essentially drove Eldad and many of the other loyalists out of town. And Eldad Tupper would eventually be proscribed by the state legislature, saying that he is an enemy to his country, and they would seize his property and auction it off, and he would eventually go off to Nova Scotia, where he eked out a life somewhere up in Brockport, I think, for the rest of his life. And then the other fellow was a local pilot who was from Nantucket and knew the coast really well. Nantucket was always on that cusp of, are they friendly to America? Are they friendly to the British? Nantucket is, we're friendly to Nantucket. That's who we're friendly to. So some of them worked both sides, but this fellow was a local pilot, and he and Eldad Tupper obviously are providing information for General Gray. So on their way to attack New Bedford, September the 5th, 1778, 1 p.m., a man named Worth Bates, who is part of the garrison of the fort at the point in Fairhaven. We all know it today as Fort Phoenix. In preparing for this talk, I was looking at some, I was looking for Timothy Ingram. The Ingrams have been around here for a long time, obviously. Ingram is commanding the fortification over there, so I was looking for people who were serving with Ingram, who said they served with Ingram in their pension requests. Most of the pensions from the 1820s, 1830s, so older people who are looking to share their stories, share their experiences in hopes of a federal pension, which they do. And we discover through those pension requests that the fort across the bay is actually called Fort Knobscot, which takes its name. It was on Point Knobscot, apparently. Knobscot being an Algonquin word for rocky outcropping. So we have Penobscot up in Maine, we have the Knobscot district of Framingham, we've got Knobscot down here in Bedford Harbor. General Gray's fleet arrives at Clark's Cove on the west side of Clark Point about 5:30 p.m. And just so you have reference, sunset that day is at 6:11. So about half an hour before sunset, this fleet of ships arrives with all of these soldiers. And the largest of the ships is only a 28-gun frigate named the Carrisford, which is commanded by Captain Robert Fanshawe. Hopefully, if this... No? No? Okay. So Gray had divided his army into several groups. The British had a pretty formulaic way of invading territory. They didn't do raids this large. I made that point earlier. But they always, typically, I shouldn't say always is a bad thing for anybody to say, but typically, they would land the light infantry and the grenadiers first. Those are the elite troops. And they had developed this idea, you see this at Lexington and Concord and Bunker Hill, where they're brigading all of the elite companies together. So all of the light infantry together, all of the grenadiers are together, and they're going to send them out first. And their job, believe it or not, is not to burn New Bedford. Their job is to secure the roads and the road crossings. So they send out the grenadiers, secure the road that is closest, that runs from essentially where Peyton Aram is, eastward to Bedford. The grenadiers seize that junction, and the light infantry keep pushing north to the north end of the bay, where the Acushnet River comes in, where the bridge is. They called it Cran's Mills. And so the light infantry were to seize that. The light infantry have a 6-pound cannon with them. And the grenadiers have 2 Coehorn mortars, which are there to lob small bombs if they needed it. And then everybody else is paired off into 2 units together under one commander. So for instance, Lieutenant Colonel James Murray has the light infantry and the grenadiers. Lieutenant Colonel Sterling takes the 15th Foot and the 42nd Foot, and so on and so on. The only one I want you to keep in mind for the moment are these 2 units, the 17th and the 44th. Now the 17th and the 44th, they land at the same time, but not at Clark's Cove. They land over on Sconticut Point. And there are a number of histories that say that they landed and then attacked the fort. And that's not quite true. They landed and they stayed there. And their job was to hold the place where the British were going to evacuate their soldiers. Traditionally, the British form in attacking any sort of river community was to go up one side of the river and come down the other. That's what they do at Danbury in large part. It's what they do at Groton, although at Groton it's actually they attack both sides at once. The idea to meet in the middle, which doesn't quite go to plan. But here they're going to go up through Bedford town, cross over the Acushnet River at the junction where it flows into the bay, and then come down through Fairhaven. So the 17th and the 44th, they're over on Sconticut Point. Everybody else is marching. It isn't until the regular foot soldiers get ashore that the trouble starts. And by that I mean they start burning warehouses, they start burning rope walks, they start burning anything to do with the maritime trade. Any ship they can get their hands on, any boat, any pile of wood. And that's their instructions from General Gray. You're just going to burn that stuff. Don't burn any private property. We don't want, no looting. Don't do it. And yet, of course, you start burning pitch, tar, hemp, wood, and you're not going to be able to control it. And so what happens is that fire just starts sweeping through. And then, not being content with that, they get up to the northern end of the bay, up near what used to be called McPherson's Wharf, and they start burning there, and so on, and so on. And there aren't really much in the way of casualties at this point. They did fire, supposedly, on 3 men and kill them as the soldiers marched into Bedford town. We know that Daniel Trafford, he's referred to as Dia Trafford, which is weird because Dia is usually short for Obadiah, but anyway, his name is Daniel Trafford. He's killed. There's a young boy named Timothy Cook who gets killed. And there's a man named Abraham Russell who is also supposedly killed, but I can't find an Abraham Russell to fit him to save my soul. I don't know where he is, but Russell, lots of Russells, lots of Abraham Russells. That may be part of the problem, but Abraham Russell was the 3rd civilian killed in Bedford. As they get to the north end of the point, quickly go through here, they had obviously, they had very accurate surveys of the coast. The British have been surveying the coast pretty much since the French and Indian War. We have a couple of maps of the attack, one of which is annotated by John Andre. Of course, he's famously hanged as a spy because of the whole Benedict Arnold debacle. But he's here as an aide-de-camp to General Gray. And this is his map, and I'll show you actually I'm going to show you the 2 maps side by side before we get started. So these are 2 maps. They look almost identical, but let me just point out a couple of things that are just so close, different. So Andre notes where the troops go, and he does this in red pencil. I don't know, everybody can look at this later. I think this is his, this is General Gray's copy. General Gray also has a copy that he sends to General Clinton when he writes his official report. And what's remarkable about this map in particular, I encourage you all to come look at it, or I can email you a copy at some point, but this map is so detailed. Who lives where? What do you expect to find? Where are the roads coming in? Where do the roads go to? This is all local knowledge. This is knowledge that they're getting from people like Eldad. I don't want to blame everything on Eldad. I'm sure he's a perfectly nice guy, just trying to make his way in the world. But this is all local knowledge. This is, and this is, really the hallmark of good intelligence work. Andre's map has some of the same information, but he's more interested in the material he's going to need to write the report. Because let's face it, generals aren't writing their own reports, right? So he's going to rely on Andre to write the report for him, and he'll just sign off on it. And that's really the 2 main differences between this map and the map that the map that Andre puts in his own record, his own personal record. So they're all the way up at the north end of the bay. The Acushnet River is flowing in. Now, there isn't much of an American military response at this point. And you're wondering, 5,000 guys hanging out around Tiverton. They all go out for sushi, or what's the plan here? And that is the plan. I mean, Sullivan was very concerned. He had heard reports of the forces coming up from General Gray's fleet. He knew the fleet was in the area. He had gotten plenty of reports that they had landed troops, but he needed to contain the British at the northern end of Aquidneck Island, and he was afraid that if he pulled any of his guys away, that the British would cross over at Howland's Ferry or at Bristol Ferry, and they would just run amok all the way towards Providence. And there was a response that went out. Thomas Crane, who I mentioned earlier, he was the commander of a train of artillery, and he had sent, on news that Gray was in the area, he had sent one cannon and about 10 guys. And that was the response, initially. So they come down to Clark's Cove, they wheel their cannon up to Clark's Cove. Of course, this is before the big embankment, so you have to imagine it's an open view. And they see 40 ships. And they're thinking, we don't have enough guys. So they start moving their cannon back, and they go all the way back to Crane's Mills, where the Acushnet River Bridge is. And they're going to wait there and see what develops. And one young man, and this is, again, just when we start talking about historical memory and how people remember these things, one young man, a lieutenant who was in this group, says, I want to go get some more information. And another young lieutenant named William Gordon says, I'm going to go with him. And of course, one gets captured and the other gets shot. And there's a dispute as to what his name is, the one who got shot. Some people say it was James Metcalf. Some people say it was Jonathan Metcalf. I'm here to tell you today, it is absolutely 100% for certain Jonathan Metcalf. And I can tell you this because his father applied for some money from the Provincial Congress, in which he claims, and this is why, Jonathan Metcalf had only been married for about a year. His daughter had just been born 3 months before. Metcalf gets shot and killed on September the 5th, and his wife dies at the end of September. So now the child is an orphan being raised by her grandparents. And the father applies for Jonathan's back pay to help raise the child. And so it's through this petition that we discovered this young man was actually from Dedham and had been part of Crane's artillery pretty much since the beginning of the war. And came down here and was killed, was buried locally after. He actually lingered for about 16 days in being wounded. Anyway, I don't know why I keep pressing the button. It's, you know, I'm an optimist, right? It's got to work at some point. So I want to talk about historical memory just for a minute, because William Gordon, the man who was captured, does file a pension application many years later, and he's talking about his experience, and he talks about being captured by the British. But in his pension application, he talks about being captured by the British on Aquidneck Island. Doesn't say anything about his time here at Bedford, and yet every historical, in the 1820s and 1830s, when they start writing the story down, they talk about they talk about William Gordon so vehemently, you know, absolutely, that he was here. So just very quickly, so you can see these little marks up here. These little hash marks up here, and this mark that crosses the two roads. He's showing you where the grenadiers were, where the light infantry went to prevent reinforcements. This little jog here is a part of the story I'll get to in a minute, but he really does a good job of taking, this is Andre, by the way, Andre taking notes based upon what people happen. I want you also to notice this name up here, which is West's. Do any of you here know the story of Washington's Bible? I've never heard. I just came across this yesterday, I kid you not. So supposedly, as the 46th Regiment was marching down through Fairhaven here, they set fire to Benjamin West's house and burned it and looted it. And the reason we know that they looted, it is because the 46th Regiment, if you go to the 46th Regimental Museum in Cornwall today, they have what they call the Washington Bible. And it's actually the Bible somebody stole from Benjamin West's house when they were burning New Bedford, and they took it back with them to England. And actually, the story of the Bible itself is rather extraordinary, because not only did they rescue the Bible from a burning building, that's so generous of them, they carried it with them the whole war. And at one point, all of their baggage got captured by American soldiers, and the American soldiers just gave it back to them, saying, sorry, we captured your Bible, here you go, you know. And so they take this back, and it's called the Washington Bible, just FYI, because they tell everybody, this is the 46th Regiment, that this is the Bible George Washington swore his Masonic oath on when he became a Master Mason, which, by the way, he did in 1753 in Fairfax, Virginia. So probably not this Bible. Anyway, so once they get to now this is all happening in one night. This is not, you know, they're doing this and then camping and eating and dining. They are just marching and burning and marching and burning, and they get down to Fairhaven. Now, as I said, their role was to get down to Sconticut Point, where their relief force was holding the exit door open for them. Now, one story says they got lost, and their local guide, Mr. Tupper, led them down the wrong road, and all of a sudden they walk into a fort. What's the fort? That's brand new information, right? You know, so this fort at the end of the point, that's so weird. But in fact, we know that they were specifically looking at, it was an 11-gun fort. They'd been building it essentially since 1775, like most of the coastal fortifications. There was, in addition to the 11 guns, there was a barracks there for 200 men. Ingram had 40 guys. And when they saw the 17th and the 44th Regiment land on Sconticut Point, Ingram and his guys said, we don't have enough guys. Let's go away and see if we can find some more. So they march off 2 or 3 miles, looking for more militia to join them, and then they wait. And according to the same historical record, a young, brash man from Wareham named Israel Fearing rallies the men and says, do or die, and off they go to defend Fairhaven. And when they get to Fairhaven is early in the morning of the second day. And that's when they're actually fighting off another attempted British landing by a couple of, probably not more than 5 or 6 boatloads of soldiers who are going to burn and destroy. And actually they succeed not only in sort of repelling this second advance, but in killing a British naval officer, a young lieutenant, and wounding one of the other sailors in the boat. So the British decide, all right, well, we've done enough here. Let's keep going. So they go off now to Martha's Vineyard, where they are going to take 10,000 sheep off the island. Imagine what the house rental prices would be if you shared the island with 10,000 sheep. I think it would be significantly less than they are today. And they take all of the arms off the island, so they strip all the arms and ammunition. They take 1,000 pounds worth of cash off the islanders, and they make them swear an oath that they will not sell any goods to Americans, only to the British. You're only going to, or General Gray said, he will come back and reap the same destruction he brought to Bedford on the people of Martha's Vineyard, which was not very nice. In total, Gray would lose 1 man killed, 4 wounded, and 16 guys go missing. Which is weird, right? Except you find out a year later that a couple of these guys have been hired by local militias to help them drill and train. And this was already happening in Freetown. They already had an ex-British soldier who was there. They destroy everything at Fort Knobscot, now Fort Phoenix. They burned the Aiken shipyard. They burned, let's see, in total, they made a claim. So John Hancock, when he became governor, he had this great idea. He says, you know what? We're going to sue the British for every piece of destruction they did along our coast. And he asked all these towns to write up reports about how much destruction did the British do in your community. And the only town that submitted a greater claim than Bedford was the town of Boston, where the British had been ensconced for the better part of a year. So about 150,000 pounds. Just to put it in perspective, when the Americans dumped 92,616 pounds of East India tea into the harbor, that was valued at just under 10,000 pounds. The equivalent to, you know, figuring out what something is worth today versus 250 years ago is always a little bit of a tricky biz. But let's say it's anywhere from $2 to $30 million, depending on your perspective and how you value things. Gray gets orders. He's going to go attack Nantucket, and Gray gets orders from Lord Howe and from General Clinton to return to New York. So he loads all of his guys back up. They sail back to New York. Gray is without question one of the most effective commanders in the British Army. He's pretty no nonsense. He's ruthless is not the word I would choose necessarily, but he knows how to achieve a goal when he sets about doing it. And at the end of the war, he will be made commander of all British forces in North America. Of course, this is after Yorktown, so they don't do a whole lot. So, you know, but he, you know, goes on to an illustrious command. The last thing which I will leave you with, so they arrived back in New York on September 17th. So the Americans lost 4 people dead. They captured the British captured about 20 people total and took them back to New York. We know this. Actually, one of the men was, he and his dad were in the fort originally when the British landed. And the way in which John Skiff and his father were captured is a little mysterious. But they go off to New York, and he's kept in prison for about 30 days until the British decide to let him go. This will be by far one of the most effective British landings during the whole war, as far as the goals that they had, devastating to the people of this region. Just in terms, not just in terms of money, but in terms of industry, in terms of fear. The idea of having it's the largest landing of British troops in New England during the whole war. 4,000 men landing all at once and laying waste to the countryside. This is a great story. One of the local farmers down near Sconticut Point was loading his wagon with all of his possessions. He's got a pair of oxen, and he's got this wagon heaped with all of his furniture and pewter and whatever, and he hears the British coming down the road. And so he decides that he's going to hide the wagon of stuff, and he leaves his 2 oxen standing in front of the house, which the British then capture and eat. So, you know, so don't double park your oxen. That's what I'm saying, you know, just, anyway. I'm going to leave it there for the moment and give you some time to ask questions, and I'm sorry about the technology. I particularly find it disheartening since, you know, I worked hard in those slides. But anyway, I'm happy to answer any questions people have. Nothing? I said it all. Awesome.
What was the name of the guy who had the wagon?
The guy who, I do know his name, but I don't have it memorized. But I can get it to you. Absolutely.
Just have one
Yeah.
comment. You mentioned Jonathan Metcalf.
Yeah.
The memorial plaque, unfortunately, says James Metcalf on it.
Yeah. No, I see it. It pops up on Facebook from time to time, or in these various web chat things where people are saying, somebody ought to fix that. That's it's hard. Traditions die hard for people, and we often don't embrace the humility. And I'm guilty as much as anybody of getting something wrong. But this is an opportunity to correct the record.
Apparently, his gravesite is unmarked. There's no mark.
That's my understanding, yes. There was a monument put up sometime later, is my understanding, but
I haven't seen it.
okay.
Because, my cemetery plot's only 1,000 yards from his.
Oh,
And I walk through there a lot, and I haven't come across it. So.
yeah, I love, it's not a great story, but I do love the Metcalf story. It's just so quintessentially the New Englanders' experience of war. These young men going off to try and affect change, and it doesn't quite go their way. Maybe that's the true story of all war, actually. Yeah. Doug.
So what were those two communities in Massachusetts that didn't wholeheartedly support independence?
You're going to get me in trouble here. This is being recorded.
No, it's not any of the ones around here.
It's the history.
That's true. There was one of them was out in Worcester County, and I can't remember at the moment which one it was, whether it was Leicester or Spencer, maybe Spencer, I think. But the one I absolutely know is Barnstable. And there's a story behind it. You can't just throw them out of the bathtub. They were going through a bit of a rough period where their two leading Whig families were fighting each other. The Otises and the Crockers. And it all had to do with who had the superior militia unit and won't salute one group's officers, and there was a brawl that broke out, and somebody capitalized on it and said, see, you vote for independence, this is what you're going to get. And when it came time for Barnstable Town Meeting to discuss it, they said, we're not going to take sides. They did later, after July 1776. They said, we're for independence too. Yes, sir. Anybody?
The West Family Bible.
Yes.
What regiment and where is it?
46th Regiment. It's in Bodmin, Cornwall. And it's right on their website. You can go take a look at it.
It's there.
Yeah. They call it the Washington Bible. Supposedly, Washington signed the flyleaf when he took the oath to be a Mason. And then sometime later, somebody mysteriously stole the piece of paper that had Washington's signature on it. But it's still called the Washington Bible.
So they're very attached to it.
They are, yeah. They had it specially rebound with the regimental number. Yeah, you're not getting it back.
They used it during the Napoleonic Wars as their regimental Bible.
Yep.
So they don't want to give it back.
No, and it has actually the story of the...
history with them than it does with the West family. So the Wests want it back. They've wanted it back, but they're not going to get it.
It's, if anything, let's learn from the Greeks. The Greeks know the British aren't great at giving stuff back.
Yeah, right,
So-
exactly.
Yes, sir.
Mentioning that 10,000 head of sheep in Martha's Vineyard, they also took about 1,500 or so head of sheep off the Elizabeth Islands.
Yes, actually, the story of the Elizabeth Islands during this period is worthy of being written at some point, because this is, Colonel Dimmock is commanding the militia in that part of Buzzards Bay, and he says, you know, they send requests to him from time to time. Can you help the guys at Newport? Can you help the guys in Providence? Can you send some guys to help the people in Bedford? And every time they get the same response from him, which is, look, I'm guarding the Elizabeth Islands. What more do you want from me? You know, and but we know that Tupper and some of these other loyalist families are using the islands as places of rendezvous, to use a French word, and as places to pass information. And they are raided time and time again by both sides. They are, you know, supposedly there are fortifications on some of them, not so much on others. And of course, all the islands are privately owned. I mean, Noshawn Island at this time, if I remember correctly, is not the Forbes family, but, or maybe it's not Noshawn, maybe it's one of the others. Anyway, the Bowden family own it. And so yes, I agree. I think the Noshawn story is definitely worth digging into.
The British had an also there at Tarpaulin Cove.
Yep. Yeah, Tarpaulin Cove is frequently utilized by the British Navy as a place of rendezvous for their ships.
Anchorage.
And Anchorage, yeah. I don't know much about the cove myself. Is it a good place for anchorage?
It is.
Okay, perfect. Sounds great. Yes, ma'am.
I grew up in the area in Japan, New York,
Mm-hmm.
where Andre was tried.
Yeah.
And that inn is still there and serves as